Dr. Emma Taylor sat in the second row of the Oprah Winfrey Show audience, her hands folded carefully in her lap to hide the slight tremor that came from the antidepressants she had been taking in secret for 8 months. At 29 years old, she was one of Chicago's most sought-after therapists, known for her remarkable success in treating severe depression and helping patients rebuild their lives from the darkest places. What her clients didn't know, what her colleagues didn't know, what even her own family didn't know, was that the woman who pulled others from the depths of despair was drowning in her own. The letter she had written to Oprah 6 weeks ago had been composed during one of her sleepless nights, after another day of perfectly conducting therapy sessions, while fighting off suicidal thoughts that had become as routine as her morning coffee. How do you explain to someone that you've dedicated your life to healing others' minds, but you can't heal your own? How do you admit that the person everyone sees as mentally strong is barely hanging on to her sanity? The irony wasn't lost on Emma that she was sitting in an audience, seeking help from a talk show host, when hundreds of people came to her office every month for the same thing. Just yesterday, she had helped a patient see light at the end of their tunnel while she couldn't see past her own darkness. She had prescribed hope while secretly hoarding sleeping pills, had taught coping mechanisms while struggling to cope herself. Today's show theme was mental health heroes, and Oprah was celebrating mental health professionals who had dedicated their lives to healing psychological wounds. Emma had been invited as part of the audience after the show's producers had been moved by her letter about the hidden struggles of healthcare workers, though they didn't know the full extent of her professional success or the depth of her personal crisis. But sitting there, listening to Oprah talk about the importance of mental health care and the heroes who provide it, Emma felt like the worst kind of fraud. How could she be celebrated as a mental health hero when she was losing her own battle with mental illness? How could she accept praise for healing others when she couldn't heal herself? She thought about her morning routine, taking her medication in secret, practicing the therapeutic techniques she taught clients, putting on her professional mask before entering the office, where she would spend 8 hours helping other people do what she couldn't do for herself. Find reasons to keep living. The moment that changed everything came when Oprah asked the audience a question that seemed to slice straight through Emma's carefully maintained facade. How many of you work in helping professions, but struggle to help yourselves? How many of you have dedicated your lives to healing others while your own wounds remain open? Emma's hand went up before she could stop herself, and immediately she felt the familiar panic that came with any moment she wasn't in complete control of her image. But something about Oprah's presence, about being in a space where vulnerability was valued over strength, made her keep her hand raised. Oprah noticed the young woman whose posture carried professional authority, but whose eyes held something that looked like profound sadness. She had interviewed enough mental health professionals to recognize the signs of someone who understood pain from both sides, as a healer and as someone who needed healing. She walked over to Emma's row with that intuitive grace that had made her America's most trusted voice, understanding somehow that this woman's story would challenge every assumption about who gets to be strong and who gets to need help. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Oprah asked, settling into a chair that had been brought over, sensing that this conversation would require careful attention and considerable courage from both of them. "Dr. Emma Taylor," she replied, her voice carrying the measured calm of someone who had spent years learning to modulate her tone to create safe spaces for others' emotions while revealing nothing of her own. "Dr. Taylor, tell us what kind of work you do," Oprah said, though something in the woman's demeanor suggested she was in the business of healing. "I'm a clinical psychologist," Emma replied, which was both completely accurate and completely inadequate to describe the lives she had touched. "I specialize in treating severe depression, anxiety disorders, and trauma. I work primarily with patients who are in crisis." The audience reacted with respect and interest, understanding that this was someone who dealt with life and death situations regularly, who held other people's deepest pain and helped them find ways through it. "How long have you been practicing?" Oprah asked. 7 years, Emma said. I've been in private practice for 4 years, and I also work part-time at a crisis intervention center. I see about 40 patients a week. The studio fell quiet as the audience processed the scope of her work. 40 patients a week meant she was carrying the emotional weight of dozens of people's darkest moments, week after week. That's an incredible load, Oprah observed. You must see some very difficult cases. I do, Emma replied simply. Patients who have attempted suicide, people dealing with severe trauma, individuals who feel like they have nowhere else to turn. My job is to help them find hope when they've lost all hope. And you're good at it? Oprah asked, though something in Emma's expression suggested this question would be complicated to answer. Yes, Emma said, but her voice carried no pride, no satisfaction, no joy in what should have been life-saving work. I have a very high success rate. Most of my patients show significant improvement. Many of them have told me I saved their lives. The studio was beginning to understand that they were about to hear something unexpected. Not a celebration of professional success, but an examination of its hidden, psychological costs. But, Oprah prompted gently, recognizing that there was more to this story. Emma looked around the studio, at faces that included some who might understand mental health struggles, people who had come her for the same kind of hope she was now seeking. For 7 years, she had been the person with answers, the one who never showed doubt or vulnerability in her professional capacity. But I can't do any of it for myself, Emma said, and the words seemed to tear something inside her as she spoke them. I teach people coping strategies I can't use. I help them find reasons to live when I struggle to find my own. I prescribe hope while secretly planning my own ending. The audience gasped audibly, understanding that they were hearing not just about professional burnout, but about a mental health crisis in someone whose job it was to prevent exactly that. Tell us more about what that looks like, Oprah said gently, understanding that specifics would help people grasp the magnitude of what Emma was experiencing. Emma was quiet for a moment, choosing which truth to share first among the many she had been hiding. 3 weeks ago, I had a session with a patient who was suicidal, she said, her voice steady despite the content. I spent an hour helping her identify reasons to stay alive, teaching her grounding techniques, helping her create a safety plan. She left my office feeling hopeful for the first time in months. She paused, the irony almost too painful to articulate. Immediately after she left, I sat in my office, researching painless methods of suicide, she continued. I gave someone else tools for living while planning my own death. I helped her see that her life had value while believing mine had none. The studio was completely silent now, witnessing the confession of someone whose professional competence existed alongside personal desperation. How long have you been feeling this way? Oprah asked, her voice carrying the gentle concern of someone who understood that some questions are hard to ask and harder to answer. About 2 years, Emma replied. It started gradually, just feeling empty after particularly difficult sessions, struggling to find meaning in my own life while helping others find meaning in theirs. But it's gotten progressively worse. Have you sought help? Oprah asked, though something in Emma's expression suggested this question would reveal another layer of the problem. Emma laughed, but it was a sound without humor, filled with bitter irony and professional understanding. How can I, she said. I'm supposed to be the expert. I'm supposed to the answers. How can I sit in someone else's office and admit that everything I teach doesn't work for me? How can I ask for help when my entire career is built on giving help? The audience was beginning to understand the unique trap that healthcare professionals faced, the expectation that healers should never need healing, that those who provide care should never need care themselves. What about medication? Oprah asked. Therapy? The same treatments you recommend to your patients? I've been taking antidepressants for 8 months, Emma admitted, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I prescribed them for myself because I couldn't face sitting across from another therapist and explaining that the person who saves lives for a living can't save her own. She looked directly into the camera, speaking to mental health professionals who might be watching and struggling with similar issues. I've been treating my own depression the way I treat my patient's depression. But it's not working, she continued. You can't be your own therapist any more than you can be your own surgeon. But admitting I need help feels like admitting I'm a fraud. Oprah leaned forward, understanding that this conversation had moved far beyond individual struggle into something much larger about the mental health system and who gets to be human within it. Emma, she said, what do you think would happen if your patients knew you struggled with depression? What do you think they would think about you? The question hit Emma like a physical force, challenging everything she believed about professional competence and therapeutic authority. They would lose faith in me, Emma replied immediately, as if she had calculated this scenario thousands of times. They would stop believing I could help them if they knew I was as lost and hopeless as they are. They would think, if she can't fix herself, how can she fix me? But is that really what you believe? Oprah asked gently. Or is that what you're afraid find out? The question hung in the air, like a challenge to everything Emma had built her professional identity around. For 7 years, she had believed that her ability to help others depended on appearing mentally stable and emotionally strong. That's when something extraordinary began to happen. From the audience, a voice called out that seemed to change the entire energy of the room. Dr. Taylor? Dr. Emma Taylor? The cameras swung toward the voice, revealing a middle-aged woman who was standing and staring at Emma with recognition and overwhelming gratitude. Yes, Emma replied, confused but recognizing something familiar in the woman's face. I'm Linda Morrison, the woman said, beginning to move toward the front of the studio. You saved my life 2 years ago when I was in the crisis center after my suicide attempt. Emma's eyes widened as the memory came flooding back. Linda had been one of her most challenging cases, a woman who had arrived at the hospital with no hope and no reason to continue living. Linda, Emma said, standing instinctively as her former patient approached. How are you? I'm alive because of you, Linda said, reaching the interview area with tears in her eyes. But Dr. Taylor, it wasn't because you were perfect or because you had all the answers. It was because you understood my pain in a way that felt real. The reunion that followed was captured by every camera in the studio, but no technology could adequately record the magnitude of what was happening. A therapist was being confronted by the living proof that her humanity, not her professional invulnerability, was what made her effective. Dr. Taylor, Linda continued, the thing that helped me most wasn't your expertise, though that was important. It was the way you talked about depression like you really understood it. Not just from textbooks, but from experience. You made me feel less alone because I could tell you had been in dark places too. But the testimonials were just beginning. From another section of the audience, a young man stood up. Dr. Taylor, it's Marcus Johnson. You treated me for PTSD after my military service, he said, walking toward the front. You helped me understand that having flashbacks didn't make me weak, that needing help didn't make me a failure. Then a teenage girl, Dr. Taylor, I'm Sarah Chen. You helped me through my eating disorder and taught me that mental illness doesn't define me. One by one, former patients throughout the audience began identifying themselves as lives Emma had saved, minds she had helped heal, futures she had preserved through her therapeutic work. But instead of praising her professional perfection, they were celebrating her ability to connect with their pain in ways that felt authentic and real. The studio audience watched in amazement as more than a dozen people made their way toward the front, each one representing someone whose life had been changed, not just by Emma's clinical skills, but by her ability to meet their humanity with her own. Dr. Taylor, said a woman named Patricia, when I told you I felt like damaged goods because of my trauma, you didn't give me clinical language about recovery. You looked me in the eyes and said, I understand what it feels like to feel broken. That's when I knew you could help me. Marcus Johnson spoke next. Dr. Taylor, you told me that therapists aren't supposed to be superhuman. They're supposed to be human beings who've learned tools for healing. You said your job wasn't to be perfect, but to walk alongside me while I learned to heal myself. The teenage girl, Sarah, added her voice. Dr. Taylor, when I asked you if you felt hopeless, you didn't pretend you hadn't. You said that understanding darkness is what helps you guide people toward light. That's when I trusted you enough to get better. Oprah watched in amazement as her studio transformed into something unprecedented, a gathering of people who had been healed not by someone's professional perfection, but by their willingness to be authentically human in their healing work. Emma, Oprah said, do you see what's happening here? These people weren't helped by your invulnerability. They were helped by your humanity, by your ability to understand their pain, because you've experienced pain yourself. Linda Morrison took charge with the natural leadership of someone who understood the weight of gratitude and the responsibility of speaking for others who had been saved. Dr. Taylor, she said, you taught all of us that mental illness doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. You taught us that needing help isn't failure, it's courage. You taught us that healers aren't gods. They're wounded healers, who use their own healing journey to help others. She paused, understanding the weight of what she was about to say. Now it's time for you to believe what you taught us, Linda continued. It's time for you to get the help you need, to be patient instead of therapist, to let someone else carry your pain for a while so you can learn to carry it differently. The studio audience rose to their feet in applause that wasn't just appreciation for a touching moment, but a collective demand that Emma apply to herself the same standards of self-care she applied to her patients. Marcus stepped forward with a proposal that would change everything. Dr. Taylor, we want to support you through your healing the way you supported us through ours. We want to remind you that seeking help doesn't make you a bad therapist. It makes you a real person who happens to be a therapist. We want to show you what it looks like to be on the other side of the therapeutic relationship, added Sarah, to be the one receiving care instead of always giving it. Patricia, speaking with the authority of someone who had faced mental health crises and chosen recovery, delivered the final argument. Dr. Taylor, you've saved dozens of lives. Now let us help save yours. Let us teach you that wounded healers are the most effective healers, that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. Oprah turned back to Emma, who was now surrounded by former patients offering to walk with her through the same journey they had navigated with her guidance. Emma, Oprah said, what do you say to these people whose lives you've touched, who are now asking you to let them touch yours? Emma looked around at the faces surrounding her, patients she had treated, lives she had preserved, people who existed in recovery because she had been willing to understand their darkness. And for the first time in 2 years, she saw her situation clearly. I say that I've been afraid of the wrong thing, Emma said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I've been afraid that needing help would make me a bad therapist, when really, refusing help is what makes me ineffective. I've been afraid that my patients would lose faith in me if they knew I struggled, when they've just shown me that my struggles are exactly what helped them trust me. She turned to face the camera directly, speaking not just to the studio audience, but to every mental health professional watching who might be struggling with similar issues. I say that healers need healing too, she continued, her voice carrying the conviction of someone who was remembering why she became a therapist in the first place. I say that understanding pain from the inside doesn't disqualify me from helping others with their pain. It qualifies me. I say that the most therapeutic thing I can do is model what it looks like to seek help when you need it. The show continued for another 30 minutes, with former patients sharing specific memories of how Emma's authenticity had helped them through their darkest moments. They talked about the way she had balanced professional competence with human understanding, how she had never minimized their struggles, but had also never lost hope for their recovery. But the most powerful moment came when Oprah asked Emma to make a commitment on national television. Emma, Oprah said, I want you to promise these people, and yourself, that you'll seek the help you need, that you'll become a patient in someone else's practice, that you'll let someone else guide your healing. Emma looked around the studio one more time, at the former patients who had become her advocates, at Oprah, who had created the space for this transformation, at the cameras that would carry this moment to mental health professionals across the country. "I promise," she said, and for the first time in 2 years, Dr. Emma Taylor made a treatment decision for herself based on what she needed rather than what she thought she should be able to handle alone. "I promise I'll find a therapist tomorrow and start my own healing journey. I promise I'll be a patient before I try to be a therapist again." The studio erupted in applause, but more than that, it erupted in relief. The collective sigh of people who had watched someone they cared about choose healing over hiding, vulnerability over invulnerability. The episode aired 6 weeks later, and the response was unprecedented. Mental health organizations across the country began implementing better support systems for therapists and counselors. The American Psychological Association launched a campaign about the importance of mental health professionals seeking their own treatment. But perhaps the most meaningful response came from Emma herself. 4 weeks after the show aired, she sent Oprah a photo from her first therapy session as a patient, sitting across from another therapist who specialized in treating healthcare workers. "Dear Oprah," she wrote, "I wanted you to know that being a patient has been the most healing and humbling experience of my career. I'm learning that wounded healers aren't broken healers. They're healers who understand healing from both sides." She described how the experience of receiving therapy had made her a better therapist, how understanding vulnerability from the patient's perspective had given her new tools for creating safety and trust with her own clients. "Most importantly," Emma wrote, "I'm learning that mental health professionals aren't superhuman. We're human beings who've chosen to walk alongside others in their healing. And sometimes that means we need someone to walk alongside us in ours." 6 months later, Emma was featured in a follow-up episode of The Oprah Winfrey Show. She appeared not as someone who had been cured, but as someone who had learned to manage her own mental health while continuing to help others manage theirs. "The irony," Emma told Oprah during her return visit, "is that being open about my own struggles has made me a more effective therapist. My patients trust me more because they know I really understand what they're going through, not just from my education, but from my experience." She had become an advocate for mental health care for mental health professionals, speaking at conferences about the importance of therapists seeking their own therapy and the dangers of the wounded healer complex. Linda Morrison, Marcus Johnson, Sarah Chen, and several others from that original show had remained connected to Emma throughout her treatment, creating a support network that extended far beyond that single day in the studio. They had formed what they called Healing Helpers, a group dedicated to supporting mental health professionals who were facing their own mental health challenges. "What Dr. Taylor taught us," Linda said during the follow-up show, "is that healing isn't a destination, it's a journey. And the best guides for that journey are people who are still walking the path themselves." 2 years later, Dr. Emma Taylor continues practicing as a clinical psychologist, but now with a deeper understanding of what it means to be both healer and someone who needs healing. She openly discusses her own mental health journey with appropriate patients, normalizing the experience of ongoing mental health care. "I learned that authenticity in therapy isn't about sharing your problems with patients," Emma reflects. "It's about being genuinely present with their pain because you understand pain, about offering hope because you've found hope, about modeling recovery because you're committed to your own recovery." She still takes antidepressants, still sees her own therapist weekly, and has learned to recognize when her own mental health needs attention. But instead of seeing these as professional failures, she now sees them as part of her ongoing commitment to being an effective healer. The support group she formed with her former patients continues to meet monthly, now expanded to include other mental health professionals who are learning to navigate their own healing while helping others heal. They call themselves Wounded Healers in Recovery, and their motto is simple: "You can't pour from an empty cup." "I spent 7 years believing that helping others required sacrificing myself," Emma says. "What I learned is that the most helpful thing I can do is take care of myself so I can show up fully for others." that healthy healers create healthier healing. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about people who never fall down, but about people who learn to ask for help getting back up. Sometimes healing isn't about being strong enough to carry everyone else's pain, but about being vulnerable enough to share your own. Dr. Emma Taylor learned that lesson in a television studio, surrounded by people whose lives she had saved, who were now determined to help save hers. And in learning to be a patient, she discovered that she hadn't lost her power as a healer. She had finally found the source of it.